My name is Sarah Miller, and I'm 29 years old. I live in New York City, where life is loud and fast. Sometimes, I crave a break from it all. So last month, I booked an errand for a quiet weekend getaway. I found a charming little house in a remote area upstate. The pictures looked perfect, rustic, cozy, and secluded. Just what I needed. When I arrived, the host, Evelyn, greeted me at the door. She was an elderly woman, probably in her late 70s, with a warm smile and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. There was something about her that felt off. Maybe it was the way she lingered a little too long after handing me the keys, or how her eyes seemed to follow me even when I wasn't looking. But I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The house itself was beautiful. Old, but well maintained. Everything creaked a little, but that's to be expected in a house this old. It was cozy enough, and I spent the first day unwinding, reading a book, and enjoying the quiet. But that night, as I lay in bed, I started to hear noises. It sounded like faint footsteps coming from above me in the attic. I knew the house was supposed to be empty. Evelyn had told me I was the only guest, but the creaking above made my skin crawl. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, or maybe some old pipes making noise. But the next night, the noises were louder, footsteps clear as day, pacing back and forth in the attic. It sounded like someone was walking around up there. My heart raced, but I told myself not to panic. Maybe Evelyn had come back for some reason. The next morning, I asked Evelyn if she had been in the house during the night. She smiled that same unsettling smile and said, "Oh, no, dear. I wouldn't disturb you. You're the only one here." I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, so that night, when the footsteps started again, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly made my way up the narrow staircase to the attic. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dark, dusty space filled with old furniture covered in sheets. As I stepped inside, the air felt thick and stale. The footsteps had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My flashlight beam swept across the room, and that's when I noticed it. A small door tucked away in the far corner. It was barely noticeable, almost like it was meant to be hidden. My heart pounded as I approached it. The door was locked, but the key was hanging on a rusty nail right next to it. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, but I couldn't. I had to know what was inside. I unlocked the door and slowly pushed it open. Inside was a tiny, cramped room. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings, articles about missing women. My stomach dropped as I scanned the headlines. Woman vanishes during vacation. Local woman disappears without a trace. My hands started to shake as I saw the dates, recent ones too. Then I noticed the photographs. Dozens of them. They were old and faded, but the faces of the women were clear. Each one had the same vacant, terrified expression. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the truth. These weren't just missing women. They were victims, women who had stayed here, just like me. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I had to get out. I turned to leave, but standing in the doorway was Evelyn. Her kind smile was gone, replaced with something cold, something sinister. "I see you found my little collection," she said, her voice calm, but laced with menace. "You weren't supposed to see that." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. What have you done?" I whispered. Evelyn stepped closer, blocking my only way out. "It's amazing, isn't it? How easy it is to make people disappear. Women like you. No one ever misses them for long." I felt a surge of panic and bolted past her, shoving her out of the way. I ran down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop to grab my things. I just ran out the front door, into the night. I kept running until I reached my car and sped away without looking back. I went to the police the next morning, but when they searched the house, they found nothing. No clippings, no photos, no sign of Evelyn. It was as if the house had swallowed the evidence whole. The police didn't believe me, but I know what I saw. I know what almost happened to me. I still see her face sometimes in my nightmares, and every time I hear a creaking floorboard or a faint noise in the night, I wonder if she's found her next victim. My name is Josh, I'm 32, and I live in San Francisco. Last month, I booked a trip to Chicago for business. I wanted something comfortable, so I rented an upscale Airbnb downtown. The photos online made the apartment look spotless, clean, modern, exactly what I needed for a few days. When I arrived, everything seemed perfect. The kitchen gleamed, the furniture looked brand new, and the view from the balcony was amazing. But then I noticed it. A dark stain on the bedroom carpet, just by the bed. It was large, about the size of a dinner plate, and looked old, deep into the fibers of the rug. It didn't seem like it was going anywhere, no matter how many times someone tried to clean it. When the host, a man named Eric, came by to check on me, I casually brought it up. "Hey, what's the deal with the stain in the bedroom?" Eric smiled, though it felt a little forced. "Oh, that. It's just an old wine spill. A guest got a little too rowdy one night. Don't worry about it." I nodded, accepting his explanation. But something about the stain bothered me. It didn't look like wine. It was darker, almost black, and spread out in a way that seemed too uneven for a simple spill. Still, I pushed the thought aside. I had work to do and didn't have time to dwell on some old carpet stain. That first night, as I was falling asleep, I heard something strange. It was faint at first, like a shuffling sound coming from the hallway outside my room. I brushed it off, thinking it was just someone in another apartment. But as the night went on, the sound grew louder, almost like something was being dragged across the floor. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe the wind rattling the old building, and eventually, I fell asleep. The next day, I went about my meetings, trying to focus. But when I returned to the apartment, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I'd had the night before. As I got ready for bed, I glanced at the stain again. Something about it was gnawing at me. It didn't help that the noise from the previous night was back. That same dragging sound. This time, it seemed to last longer, echoing in the hallway outside my door. I put a pillow over my head, trying to block it out, and eventually drifted off. By the third night, I was starting to feel like something was wrong. The noise had returned, louder than ever. It didn't stop this time, just kept going, like someone was dragging a heavy object back and forth, back and forth. My heart raced, but I was frozen in bed, too scared to move. I waited for the noise to stop, but it never did. Unable to sleep, I pulled out my phone and started researching the building, hoping to distract myself. That's when I found an old article buried in the local news archives. The headline hit me like a punch. "Brutal Murder Shocks Downtown Chicago Residents." The article detailed how, years ago, a woman had been killed in the very apartment I was staying in. Her body had been dragged across the floor and left there for days before being discovered. My stomach turned as I read the description. The body had been found right where the stain was now. I sat there in shock, my mind racing. The stain wasn't from wine. It was from her. That dragging sound, it wasn't my imagination. It was the sound of her body being moved across the floor all those years ago. The noise I'd been hearing was real, and I was sleeping in the room where it had happened. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my bag, and bolted out of the apartment. As I rushed down the hallway, I could still hear the faint dragging sound behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I didn't stop running until I was outside, far away from that building. I called the police the next day, but they didn't find anything suspicious. The stain had been cleaned, and the building's history wasn't enough for them to investigate. The host, Eric, had been renting the apartment out for years, keeping the gruesome past hidden, and no one seemed to care. I left Chicago the next morning, but I couldn't forget what happened. I still hear the sound sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet. That faint, dragging noise. I'll never know if I was just another guest staying in a haunted room, or if something far worse had been planned for me. All I know is I'll never trust an Airbnb host the same way again. My name is Emma. I'm 27, and I live in Boston. Last month, my boyfriend Tom and I decided to rent a cozy Airbnb cabin in the woods for a romantic weekend getaway. We wanted to escape the stress of city life and just relax for a couple of days. The cabin was in a remote area, surrounded by trees, far from any neighbors. It sounded perfect for what we needed. When we arrived, the cabin looked just like the pictures, small, charming, and welcoming. The air was fresh, and everything was so quiet, almost too quiet. We unpacked and settled in, ready to enjoy our time together. Inside, there was a guest book on the coffee table. Out of curiosity, I picked it up and started flipping through the pages. Guests had written notes about their stay, saying how peaceful and beautiful the cabin was. Everyone seemed to have a great time, except for one thing. I noticed there was an entry from someone named Clara, who had supposedly stayed there the week before us. But her page was blank. No message, no date, just her name and the time she checked in. That's weird, I said to Tom, showing him the book. Maybe she forgot to write something. He shrugged, not too concerned. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why would every other guest write something, but Clara didn't? As I unpacked our bags, I opened the closet to hang up my coat. That's when I found something that made my stomach drop. There were a few items of clothing still hanging there, women's clothing. They looked like they'd been there for a while. "Tom, come here," I called out, my voice trembling. He came over and saw the clothes. Maybe the cleaners missed them. I wasn't so sure. I started wondering about Clara again. Why would her clothes still be here if she checked out a week ago? Later that evening, the host, a man named Greg, stopped by to see if we had everything we needed. I decided to ask him about Clara. "Oh, Clara?" He seemed nervous, his eyes darting around. "She, left in a bit of a hurry. Some family emergency, I think." I didn't believe him. The way he stammered through his explanation felt wrong. Tom didn't say much, but I could tell he was starting to feel uneasy too. We both thanked Greg, and he left soon after, but the atmosphere inside the cabin had changed. There was an underlying tension neither of us could shake. That night, we tried to relax, but I couldn't sleep. The woods outside felt too still, like something was waiting. Around midnight, I heard a faint noise, whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I realized it sounded like voices. I woke Tom up, but the whispers had stopped. "Probably just the wind," he mumbled, rolling over. But I wasn't convinced. I got up and went to the window. Outside, I saw shadows moving between the trees, dark figures slipping in and out of the moonlight. My heart pounded in my chest. I closed the curtains quickly and crawled back into bed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, Tom and I decided to go for a walk to clear our heads. As we wandered through the woods near the cabin, something caught Tom's attention. He knelt down by a patch of disturbed earth. "Emma, look at this," he said quietly. It was a shallow grave. The dirt had been freshly turned, and something was buried there. My blood ran cold. We didn't dig, but we didn't have to. The realization hit us both at the same time. Clara. This was where she ended up. Without saying another word, we rushed back to the cabin, packed our things, and got in the car. As we drove away, I couldn't stop shaking. I knew, deep down, that Greg, the host, had something to do with Clara's disappearance. We drove straight to the nearest town and called the police. A few days later, I found out Greg had been arrested. The police confirmed that Clara had been staying at the cabin, but she never left. The investigation was ongoing, but they suspected Greg had been luring women like Clara, and almost me, into his cabin for years. Tom and I escaped, but I couldn't get the image of that grave out of my mind. The thought that we were so close to being his next victims still haunts me. Even now, every time I hear the wind, I swear I can still hear those whispers, reminding me of how lucky we were to get away.